The barber froze when he brought the scissors close to the customer's neck. That scar, 6 centimeters long, non-surgical, made by something sharp, exactly like he'd seen 28 years ago. Same place, same angle, same depth. Welcome to Story Factory. Before we begin this powerful story, tell me in the comments which city you're watching from today. And if you believe stories like this deserve to be remembered, hit that subscribe button and help us keep these stories alive. Frank's Barbershop stood at the end of Main Street, next to an old gas station. Its red, white, blue pole had been spinning at the same hypnotic rhythm for 30 years, welcoming customers with familiar comfort. Inside, everything seemed frozen in time. Leather chairs, worn but sturdy, mirrors with oxidized frames but crystal clear, walls decorated with old baseball photos, and a single military picture no one ever asked about. Tony Marcelli had inherited this shop from his father. At 58, with gray hair cut by his own scissors, his hands were steady and precise. He wasn't known for conversation. He spoke only when necessary, did his work, and sent his customers on their way. The shop's atmosphere reflected him, quiet, reliable, never surprising. Every morning he opened at 7, closed at 6 in the evening, closed Mondays. For 30 years he'd maintained the same routine. First, sweep the shop, disinfect his tools, make his coffee, and wait for the first customer. Never married, never had children, just his work and his silence. His customers knew him well. Perfect haircuts, never too much talk, newspapers always current. Some found him a bit cold, but nobody complained. Good barbers were hard to find, and Tony was genuinely good. That Tuesday morning had started like any other. Tony had opened the shop, prepared his tools, brewed his coffee. His first customer was Mr. Henderson, 70-year-old retired postal worker who came every 2 weeks, always wanted the same cut. Then young Mike, college student who always came last minute, always in a hurry for his haircut. When the door chimed at 10:30, Tony didn't even look up. "Please wait just a minute," he said, finishing Mike's hair. The rhythm of scissors, the scent of cologne, the quiet chatter of customers, everything was normal. After Mike left, Tony took a short break. He sipped his coffee, looked at his reflection in the mirror. Gray hair, tired eyes, but hands still steady, still doing good work. "Are you ready?" Tony turned. The man sitting in the waiting chair was middle-aged, in his 40s, short-cut hair but grown out a bit. Cleanly dressed, proper posture, a slight smile on his face. "Sure, have a seat," Tony said. When the man sat in the chair, Tony noticed this wasn't an ordinary customer. His posture was different, back straight but not tense, arms relaxed but ready, like athletes or soldiers carried themselves. "What are we doing today?" Tony asked, draping the cape over the man's shoulders. "Short, but not too short." "Have a job interview." Tony nodded. He'd had many customers coming for job interviews. They all made the same request, professional but not too severe looking. He picked up his scissors, examined the man's hair. Quality shampoo, regular cuts, attention to grooming. Men with military backgrounds were usually this meticulous, he knew. When he made the first cut, the man didn't flinch at all. Tony noticed this. Most people pull back slightly at first touch, try to adjust. This man was like stone. "Military background?" Tony asked. He usually didn't ask questions this early, but curiosity had won. "Why do you ask?" "Your posture, your reaction to the scissors, seems familiar." The man looked at Tony through the mirror reflection. "Used to be. Long time ago." Tony nodded and continued. He didn't ask more questions. If a customer didn't want to talk, he didn't push. As Tony moved to the sides of the hair, he began to see the man's neckline. There, Just below the hairline was a faint mark. At first he didn't pay attention. As people aged, everyone had small marks, dull spots. But as he brought his scissors closer to that area, the mark became clearer. This wasn't an ordinary scratch. The edges were clean, the healing pattern distinct, the depth visible. Not a surgical scar, either. Tony's hands slowed slightly. That mark seemed familiar, very familiar. The scar on the back of your neck. How did that happen? He asked, his voice a bit lower than usual. The man looked at him through the mirror reflection. Old accident. Don't like remembering it much. Tony stopped his scissors. His heartbeat had quickened. That scar, that position, that shape. When did it happen? If you don't mind me asking. 1995. Why are you curious? Tony's hand trembled. Slight, but enough for the customer to notice. 1995. That year, that place, those moments. 1995. Bosnia-Herzegovina. Tony was Specialist Anthony Marcelli then. 2nd Infantry Division. His job was protecting and repairing communication equipment. He wasn't a combat soldier, but he was on the front lines. That day, September 12th, 1995, he still remembered the coordinates. 44.2026 degrees north, 17.9073 degrees east. A small hill, wooded area, full of enemy snipers. Their teams were caught in between. Tony had been wounded that day. His leg, not serious, but he couldn't move. Sergeant David Coleman was beside him. 25 years old, tall, calm but determined. 3 years younger than Tony, but more experienced. When enemy fire intensified, Coleman had said, "You need to stay here. I'll bring help." "Take me with you," Tony had insisted. "I can run faster. Hide here." When Coleman started running, the sniper bullet came. Back of the neck, from the side. Not deep, but bleeding. Coleman stumbled, fell, but got back up. "Go," Tony had shouted. "Protect yourself." But Coleman came back, wounded, bleeding. He'd carried Tony on his back, 200 meters to the safe zone. During that time, the neck wound had opened more, his blood staining Tony's uniform. When Tony got out of the hospital a week later, he'd searched for Coleman, but couldn't find him in military records. Transferred, sent to another unit. They never made contact. For 28 years he'd thought about that day. Coleman's face, his voice, his courage, and that wound on the back of his neck. Tony put down his scissors. His hands were shaking now. The customer saw his condition in the mirror reflection. "Is there a problem?" Tony swallowed, tried to collect his voice. That wound. Did it happen in Bosnia in 1995? The man's face changed. His gaze in the mirror sharpened. "How do you know that?" Tony stepped back. His heart was beating so fast he was having trouble breathing. I was there." Silence. Long, heavy silence. Only the sound of the shop's old clock ticking could be heard. The man slowly turned. He looked at Tony's face, his eyes, his hands. Then recognition appeared on his own face. "Marcelli?" Tony nodded. His eyes had filled. Coleman. David Coleman stood up from the chair. The cape was still on his shoulders, but he didn't care. Two men stood facing each other after 28 years in a small barber shop. "Damn, Marcelli. Is it really you?" Tony started laughing. He was laughing while crying. "I looked for you. Couldn't find you in the records. Couldn't learn where you went. I was transferred. Other operations. Then I left. Returned to civilian life." Tony approached. He looked at the back of Coleman's neck. The scar was still there, faded, but visible. "That day, the day you saved me. You saved my life." Coleman nodded. "You saved mine, too. I was going to die there. Without you, I wouldn't have had the courage. I was wounded. I didn't do anything wrong. You motivated me. The moment you said go, I remembered I needed to get home. I realized I couldn't leave you unsafe. The two men sat down. Tony turned the customer chair toward Coleman, sat in the chair across from him, a comfortable position as if they could talk for hours. What happened after that day? Tony asked. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks. They stitched the wound, but it left a scar, then transferred to Germany, joined operations there, left in 2001. Why? Coleman thought. I got tired, saw too much, lost enough people, wanted to try my luck in civilian life. What did you do? Became a construction engineer. I'd already finished college. The Army gave me experience. Now I manage big projects. You? Tony smiled. Took over my dad's shop. Been cutting hair for 30 years. Are you happy? Yes. You? Yes. I'm married. Have 2 kids. Sarah's 16. Michael's 14. Good kids. Tony nodded. Never had a family. Never found the right person. Maybe I never looked. Is work your life? Work is my life. Customers, routine, silence. It's everything I need. Coleman stood up, looked at his reflection in the mirror. His hair was half cut, looked strange. Finish this, he said with a smile. Can't go to the job interview like this. Tony also stood up, took his scissors, but this time his hands weren't shaking. Calm, focused. As the sound of scissors filled the shop, they continued talking. That day, when you were carrying me on your back, what were you thinking? Tony asked. My home, my mother, things my father taught me. He'd said never leave your buddy behind. You were my buddy. I wouldn't even consider myself your friend. We'd known each other for a few weeks. Time moves differently in war. A few weeks feels like years. You were the person I trusted. Tony was fixing the back of the hair. He was careful not to touch Coleman's neck scar. That scar, does it bother you? Not anymore. In the first years, yes. Every time I saw it, I remembered that day. But now it's a memory. A good memory. How good? Because that day I learned who I was. What I could do, that I had courage. Tony finished the haircut. He looked at Coleman's face. He looked younger, more refreshed. The haircut had changed him, but it was really Tony who had changed. How is it? Coleman asked, looking at his reflection in the mirror. Perfect. You're ready for the job interview. This job interview is actually very important. A big project. I'm starting a company. What kind? Veteran reintegration. Helping people with military backgrounds adapt to civilian life. Consulting, job placement, therapy, everything. Tony stopped. This is a great idea. Would you like to be involved? Me? Yes. Sell this shop. Work with me. Do you have connections with Veterans Affairs? Tony thought. Actually, yes, I have many veteran customers. They all talk here. Relax. I'm a good listener. That's it. You have these skills. Coleman stood up, took off the cape. Tony headed to the register to take payment, but Coleman stopped him. This cut is special. No charge. Business doesn't work that way. This isn't business. This is friendship. Tony nodded. He understood. Coleman pulled out a business card from his pocket. My information is here. Think about this offer. No rush, but we could do good work together. Tony took the card. David Coleman, Senior Project Manager, Morrison Construction. At the bottom was handwritten, call me, D. I'll call, Tony said. I'll definitely call. Coleman headed to the door, then turned. Tony? Yes? For saving me that day. Thank you. You saved me. We both saved each other. After Coleman left, Tony stood there for a long time, holding the card, watching Coleman disappear through the window. After 28 years, he'd found his old friend, or his friend had found him. The atmosphere of the shop had changed. It was no longer just a place where hair was cut. It was where lives intersected, where past met present, where new beginnings were planned. That evening, when closing the shop, Tony looked at himself in the mirror. Same face, same hands, but he could feel the change inside. For 30 years he'd lived quietly, trying to bury his past. Now that past had returned, offering him a new future. He put the business card in his wallet and turned off the lights. Tomorrow he'd call Coleman. Maybe it was time for change. People passing by the barbershop would never know what had happened inside. They'd see it as an ordinary haircut. But for Tony, that day was the turning point of his life. Two veterans, after 28 years, had come together by chance. But maybe it wasn't chance. Maybe some stories deserve to be completed. Maybe some friendships never end. They just wait. Some people come into our lives, leave a mark, and go. Some stay but are forgotten over time. But some return even after 28 years and reshape our lives. Does Tony and David's story seem familiar to you? Do you have such people in your life who saved you, inspired you, then lost but never forgotten? Share their names in the comments. Tell their stories. Because at Story Factory, we believe in keeping alive the stories waiting to be forgotten. If this story touched you, subscribe, share. Stories like this need to be heard. See you in the next video. And remember, sometimes the most valuable people wait in the most ordinary places.